purpose of Freethought Forum is to be vigilant to the encroachment of religion into government and to educate the general public as to what a freethinker is.
My thoughts give me power.
No scholar can map them.
No hunter can trap them. No person can deny. Die Gedanken sind frei. No
Good evening. This is Freethought Forum, and I'm Sally Chizek, and I will be your host today. This show is produced by my guest, Catherine Fahringer. Welcome to your own show, Catherine.
Thanks, Sally.
And we're going to do an interview with Anne Gaylor, and Catherine will represent Anne Gaylor. So without any further ado, welcome to the show, Anne.
Thank you.
And I know you've led a very interesting life. But let's start off with when you were literally choked on a television show.
Well, that was in Philadelphia. I was speaking on the subject of abortion, and a member of the audience thought he would drive the devil out of me. I also appeared on other television shows where I met prejudice, but this guy really got me around the throat and wanted to choke the devil out of me. So,
well, that must have been an inspiration for the Jerry Springer show.
Well, yes, it could well have been.
We know that you're with the Freedom from Religion Foundation. So what is your present title?
Well, I have many: feminist, freethinker, and abortion rights activist, but my real title, present title, is president of the Freedom from Religion Foundation.
Well, Margaret Sanger worked as a nurse in the poorest section of New York, and she watched women die of botched abortions and also having multiple births, unwanted births. So that spurred her to action. What spurred you?
Well, my husband and I started a suburban weekly newspaper of our paper in Wisconsin named the Middleton Times-Tribune. It was quite successful and won awards in community journalism, but it proved too lively for the tastes of some of the stolid religious community, especially when I ran the first editorial in the state calling for the legislation of abortion. That was in 1968. You can imagine how that went down.
Yeah. Well, after the newspaper, what did you do?
I became a pioneering abortion rights activist and established a referral service.
Was that after Roe versus Wade?
No, it was 3 years prior to that. I also administered as a volunteer the Women's Medical Fund charity, which I still work with, which has helped more than 7,000 needy Wisconsin women pay for abortions.
Sounds like you were quite busy.
Oh, I was very busy and active in many groups working for women's rights. In 1972 to 78, I was Vice President Central of the National Abortion Rights Action League.
That must have been very gratifying.
It was, but the problems I found were that none of these organizations dealt with the root cause of women's oppression.
What was that?
Religion, capital R.
Well, that's true. Elizabeth Cady Stanton said, "A consideration of women's position before Christianity, under Christianity, and at the present time shows that she is not indebted to any form of religion for one step of progress or one new liberty."
Although Stanton was speaking of her present time, it's still true today.
Yes, well, what is your background? Were your parents religious?
No, I'm a second-generation freethinker. I was born at our family farm in 1926. I was the only daughter and youngest child of Jason and Lucy Nicole.
What did your father do?
He was a graduate of the agricultural course at the University of Wisconsin, so he did what he loved most, farming. He managed a cooperative grain and feed store in Tomah, Wisconsin. My mother graduated from Milwaukee State Teachers College and was an elementary school teacher in and around Tomah for several years before her marriage.
Your maiden name is Nicole. Is that Scottish?
Yes, it is. My father's ancestors came to the United States in the mid-1800s. My aunt used to tell me that my great-grandfather had come through the wonderful fertile soil of southern Wisconsin to find some sand and hills like he was used to in Monroe County.
Oh, what's your mother's ancestry?
My mother's family traced their beginnings in America to the Mayflower. Their name was Soule. George Soule, a carpenter's apprentice, was one of the hardy few survivors of that difficult first winter at Plymouth Colony.
Oh, that sounds interesting. I wish we had more time to talk about that. Tell me about your mother.
Well, it's sad about my mother. I never really knew her. She died unexpectedly in 1928, leaving my 3 brothers aged 4, 7, and 8, and I was but 2.
Well, that's very sad, and it's always tragic to lose your parents, but how did your father manage with so many young ones?
Well, it couldn't have been easy, but he had already hired, fortunately, a practical nurse housekeeper to care for us during the 2 weeks my mother was in the hospital. But instead, of course, the housekeeper stayed for 10 years because my mother died. She was Irish, and the housekeeper was Irish, and she loved to tell us stories and sing songs, and we loved her.
Oh, that other than the loss you suffered, it sounds as if you had a nice childhood.
I did, indeed. We had a lot of animals to love, and I had a special pet lamb named July Plum. She was named for a character in Lucy Maud Montgomery's novel. It was an ideal time for me. I could play in the creek and run through the farm and wade to a tiny island.
Well, I suppose your fascination for islands determined many of your later travel plans.
I suppose that's right.
What about your schooling?
Well, I had an unusual schooling. I started first grade in a one-room country schoolhouse at age 4 and soon read everything there. I graduated from Toma High School and received a Bachelor of Arts degree from the University of Wisconsin in Madison with an English major. I financed my education through room and board and summer jobs.
I read a critique of the scriptural Jesus where you describe how you came to love reading so much. Tell us about that.
As I said, I attended a one-room country school. They were not so fussy about what age you were when you started, so I got to start first grade at age 4. Consequently, I learned to read at a very early age. I loved it. I read everything I could put my hands on. This was in the 30s, and country schools were poor. There were not all that many books available. Our school library, unlike those of today, was just an old oak bookcase whose glass doors had been broken out years before.
Oh.
It held only 90 books for the children in all 8 grades. It didn't take me long to go through them. Soon I was reading the adult books at home. Occasionally, in desperation, I even read my father's agricultural journals.
Did your family have a Bible?
Yes, but it repelled me so that I would only dip into it here and there. It didn't make much sense. And far from impressing me or comforting me, it frightened and dismayed me. I thought perhaps it was really an adult book, and I might appreciate it more when I was grown.
When did you get back to reading the Bible?
When I was in college, and certain parts of the Old and New Testament were required for reading for a literature course.
Well, what did you think of it?
Not much.
I'm sure not.
It made more sense than it had when I was a child, but I was still unconvinced of its merit. Some of the prose was quite stately, and some of the poetic images were lovely, but the content and teachings still troubled me. However, since so many clergy persons thought it was great literature and immortal truth, I thought the fault was probably mine. And perhaps in a few years I might understand what all the excitement was about.
Were you about 19 at the time? When did you try reading the Bible again?
Well, for a while I was busy with children, career, causes, and always had a good supply of delightful books on my nightstand. I had no occasion to read the Bible, but something happened in the 1960s that sent me back to it.
And what was that?
Well, it was a ferocious flap when the Beatles came over and they said they were more popular than Jesus. Widely circulated, the famous quotation caused an uproar in the country. With hundreds of boycotts of Beatle music by disc jockeys, passionate denunciations from pulpits, and a rash of bonfires of Beatles records and music. My friend, a churchy type, argued he did not like to see anyone's religion belittled, adding that whatever one thought of the divinity of Jesus, surely he was a wise and admirable man.
And is that how you remember Jesus?
No. Somehow I don't remember him that way. So it was back to the Bible, and this is what I found. Jesus believed in demons, that they caused illness, both mental and physical. Jesus didn't speak a word about germs, bacteria, viruses, contagion, and the importance of sanitation. He didn't know about these things. He believed demons to be responsible for sickness. Jesus unnecessarily killed animals. Jesus, who had the power to still the seas and calm the winds, chose to drive demons from people into pigs. Why didn't he just drive the demons into the sea and spare 2,000 pigs?
Well, it sounds like you have a fondness for pigs.
For the most part, a pig is a very gentle and intelligent animal, and clean if given a chance. A pig can be a delightful pet.
Any other thoughts about Jesus?
Oh, yes. He told the people he spoke to that the world would end in their lifetime. Obviously a very serious era. Jesus believed in and promoted the idea of everlasting punishment, even for offenses as small as calling someone a fool. He often became vindictive if someone did not believe in him.
That's rather vain of him, isn't it?
Yes, and he also destroyed a fig tree out of peevishness just because it had no figs out of season. Never mind, that didn't make any difference to him. He caused the tree to shrivel and die, and no one got any benefit from the fruit.
So much for feeding the hungry.
I found so many other undesirable traits on close scrutiny, far from being a great moral teacher, a description that even some non-believers applied to Jesus. This deity of the New Testament emerges as an unadmirable, unconvincing myth.
Okay, well, I agree with you, but back to the past.
All right.
When did you marry?
Right after graduation, I married Paul Joseph Gaylor in 1949 in Springfield, Missouri, and we returned to live in Wisconsin. My 4 children were born there: Andrew, Joseph, twins, Ian and Annie Laurie, and Jamie Lachlan.
Well, that's a lot of children and a lot of Scottish names.
Yes, and they were a handful. In 1958, I and a partner started the first temporary office help service in Madison. I stayed with that until 1959 when it was sold. After that, my husband and I went into the newspaper business.
And when did you start working on the women's issues?
In the mid-'70s, with my daughter Annie Laurie and an elderly friend, John Sondrak of Milwaukee, we started the Freedom from Religion Foundation. In the beginning, we met in my dining room. In 1978, we organized a national association with myself as president.
Yeah, who's the president now?
I still hold that post.
No. What was the focus of your group?
Separation of church and state and the education of the public about non-theism.
Will you explain what you mean by non-theism?
I'm glad you asked that. A lot of people don't seem to know. Theism is a belief in God or gods. Naturally, non-theism would be just the opposite, no belief in a god or gods.
Okay, you wrote a book, Lead Us Not into Penn Station. I believe that was in 1983. And in one of the essays, you wrote, "What's wrong with the 10 Commandments?"
Yes, I did. And I don't usually, push my own material, but I'm going to this time.
Good.
And here's a little copy of the book. And one of my friends told me that whenever she needed to find a reference for something, whatever it was, in this tiny book, she could generally find it. It's an astonishing compliment to me for these simple little essays.
Yes, it is.
And you wanted to know something about the 10 Commandments, did you say?
Yes, the 10 Commandments.
As you know, the Old and New Testaments have a different number of commandments, but let's deal with the chapter 5 of Deuteronomy.
Okay.
They epitomize the childishness, and the vindictiveness, and the sexism, the inflexibility, and the inadequacies of the Bible as a book of morals.
You're beating around the bush. What do you mean?
Oh, I'm not really beating around the bush. I'm just trying to turn the page.
Okay.
Actually, only 6 of the 10 deal with an individual's moral conduct. The first 4 scream, here I have to pump my stuff again. The first 4 scream that the Lord thy God has an uneasy vanity, and like most dictators, must resort to threats rather than intellectual persuasion to promote a point of view.
Well, but surely some of the commandments have some merit.
Do you think that any God who possesses a modicum of goodwill, which you would expect to find in any good neighbor, would want to punish children even unto the 3rd and 4th generation because their fathers could not believe in him? It's hard to read the first 4 commandments and perceive the pettiness, bluster, bombast, and psychotic insecurity. Is that worthy of respect?
Well, I see what you mean, but What about respecting your mother and father? That's a good commandment.
Well, yes, and that's very good, but why should any child be commanded to honor parents who have abused, beaten, or neglected them?
Well, but how about commandments 6 through 9? Thou shalt not kill, commit adultery, steal, or bear false witness. Good, aren't they?
Well, they have some merit, but even they need extensive revision. To kill in self-defense or to administer medication that will end the life for a terminally ill patient who wishes to die is defensible. Adultery, for the most part, fidelity in marriage is a sound rule. But some marriages may outlast affection, or some couples may agree to live by different rules. This is a private thing, I think. Also, adultery involves consenting adults. How much more relevant and valuable it would be to have a commandment that forbids the violent crimes of rape and incest.
Yes, indeed. But going back, how about stealing and bearing false witnesses and coveting thy neighbor's wives?
Yeah, well, okay, stealing. Surely this cries for some amending clauses. Should people who are cold or ill steal to ameliorate their situation? Should a child who is hungry not steal? Second, bearing false witness is construed to mean don't lie, and that is a valuable moral precept, except again, it is stated in absolute terms. Lies have saved lives, preserved relationships, and saved hurt feelings. Third, coveting thy neighbor's wife, in addition to lumping his wife with an ox and an ass, the Bible loftily overlooks the woman who might desire her neighbor's husband.
Yeah, actually, it's just an example of how little regard the Bible has for women. We're not even worth mentioning.
It's very evident throughout the Bible. On the subject of covetousness, I can't say that word. Covetousness.
We get it.
It may be non-productive and unpretty, but to make a big deal out of it is ridiculous. If you don't have a comfortable home, productive farm, or the latest pickup truck, what's the good harm in wishing you did?
Well, anything else to say on the subject?
Well, little in Christianity is original. Most of it is borrowed, just as the celebration of Christmas was borrowed, I say so.
Stole.
Borrowed from Roman and earlier pagan times. When the Lord supposedly wrote his commandments and delivered them to Moses, he was only aping earlier gods, Bacchus, Zoroaster, and Minos. I think that almost anyone could write a kinder, wiser, and more reasonable set of commandments for than those Christians insist we honor.
Well, now going back to the Freedom from Religion Foundation, do you put out a newspaper?
Yes, indeedy.
Okay. Is that it right there?
This is the newspaper. Freethought Today, the only Freethought newspaper in the entire country. There are many magazines and newsletters, of course, on Freethought.
Right,
but this is the only newspaper, and we're very proud of that.
Your foundation produced 2 documentaries. What were they about?
Yes, one was called A Second Look at Religion, and the other, Champions of the First Amendment. They generated a variety of lawsuits around the country to protect the First Amendment. Books were published and annual national conventions were held. In fact, we held one here in San Antonio in November 1998. All of this popularized the 19th century term, Freethinker.
Okay. Well, now I know you were on several shows. So tell us about your experience with the Phil Donahue show.
Yes, Phil the liberal.
Yes.
As you know, Phil Donahue is a Catholic, and he refused to show my book on abortion because of its positive title, Abortion is a Blessing. As we were about to go on the air, he told me my book was tasteless and would create shockwaves across America. However, toward the end of the show, in response to a call about the power of religion in the media, I said, let me tell you about the power of religion. I am probably the first person ever to appear on the Donahue show whose book could not be shown because of religious prejudice. Because I dared to write a book with a positive title about abortion, my book may not be shown. Yet I have referred thousands of women for abortions. They have been as young as 12 and as old as 52. Many of them have had 9 and 10 children. Many have been ill. I know that abortion is a blessing. It is a blessing for women and a blessing for society.
What did Donahue do?
He sheepishly displayed the book, and America survived the shockwave.
And I know you have won a lot of awards, and I know also that you're really too modest to mention them. So let me just mention a few. You got an award for the Zero Population Growth Recognition Award. That was in 1983. Humanist Heroine Award, American Humanist Association in 1985. Commitment to Women Award, Women's Political Caucus, Wisconsin, 1989. Feminist of the Year Award, National Organization for Women, Wisconsin, in 1994. And a citation by the Wisconsin State Senate, 1994. Would you tell us some of your best-known aphorisms?
Nothing fails like prayer.
I like that one.
There can be no religious freedom without the freedom to dissent. That is something that former President Clinton never could get through his head, and I'm afraid Lieberman is very much the same.
I'm afraid
keep
so.
Quoting that terrible thing about we have religious freedom in America, but we don't have freedom from religion. Well, there can be no religious freedom without the freedom to dissent. And another I like is it is possible to speculate endlessly about the non-existent.
That's right. And we just, it's the same thing. What came first, the chicken or the egg? We'll never get, no one will ever know.
Mm-hmm.
And I do want to thank you. We're not through talking yet, but we're through with this interview, and I want to thank you for sharing all your views with us. And I do want to say that the information for this program was taken from the book, Women Without Superstition, that I have right here. It was edited by Annie Laurie Gaylor. Do you know her?
She's my daughter.
I know she is. And did a fine job on it. And I also want to talk a little bit about Tommy Thompson. I believe he's now in the Bush cabinet.
I'm afraid so, and in a very bad position too.
Would it be fair to say that that was a gain for Wisconsin and a loss for the United States?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yes. You have any more information on Tommy Thompson?
Oh, not a whole lot.
Your ex-governor?
He's Catholic, and that explains quite a lot of his attitude towards abortion. And he's tried to insist that married couples have counseling from
the
clergy.
Church. Yes, right, before they can
And
get
that
married.
did not go over very well with me or my organization.
Right.
We didn't like that idea at all. What's wrong with psychologists? Can't we just put this thing in a secular content and not try to make everything religious? Everybody is not religious.
Especially if it's someone from the Catholic Church. Those men never marry, and they have no experience. How can they counsel you?
Yeah. How can they?
Yeah.
Indeed. Based on what?
Right. And
Not experience.
what part? I don't know if you know. What part did he play in that selling that piece of land to the church? I guess. In that park.
That terrible Jesus thing that stands in a public park.
Yeah, I mean, but it's huge. It's not,
it's enormous.
Yes.
Enormous. Yes. Well, that was kind of a sneaky deal, and I don't really understand all the ins and outs of it. But obviously, favoring religion, that they sold a small plot of land in the middle of a public park to a religious group, so they could keep this 90-foot-tall Jesus saying, "Welcome to whatever town it was in." What was it? I forgot.
Well, I forgot what the town was, but it was, I think it said, everything is possible. Is that the one? Or maybe I'm getting that mixed up.
Mixed up with another. I don't know. It's something about welcome to.
I'll show you the light.
Something
like that.
Dreadful.
Yes.
I like to block these things out as often as possible because it's so unpleasant.
Well, now that you're Catherine, now you can be Catherine. Would you tell us a little bit about Anne? I mean, I know you're friends.
Oh, yes, and she's marvelous. And it was very hard to be Anne and be, unassuming and sort of modest, because I can't do that. And she is really the most modest. She was thrilled to death when I said we were going to do a program about her. And she said, "Oh, really?" And I said, "Yes." And I said, "I need to clear up a few pronunciations, one of which I goofed badly on." But that was the one I didn't ask her about. And she was just thrilled to bits. She thought that was marvelous. And I said, oh, we've talked about you before on the show, but this one's going to be a whole show on you. And she just was delighted and was so honored. And you'd think this was, some professional kind of program. She was so thrilled. So that's the kind of person she is. And it's really, you read about her and you say, gosh, and then she walks into a room and she's so tiny.
I know,
and she's so
timid-like.
soft-spoken. But I mean,
there's brains
iron
behind
lady
that.
behind
Yeah.
that
Right.
sweet little delicate
Exactly.
exterior.
Yes.
Oh, what a brain, too.
The Freedom from Religion Foundation, that's run by a family, is it not? Her family. Who else
Which I
is
think
in
is
that?
good. Yes, well, Annie Laurie, her daughter, is the editor of Freethought Today, the newspaper,
Yes.
which I bragged about for Anne. And my son-in-law, Dan Barker, is the public relations, and, well, he does everything, and he goes out on debates, he goes across the country. We could afford to bring him here and set up a debate. But I've about decided that this debating the existence of God is just a lost cause.
Oh,
The
yes.
Christians, you can't debate them.
You can't. Once they say, I know there's a God, hey, the argument's over.
I know.
You can't debate
if you
with someone
start
like
with that.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
And Dan has written some books too, has he
Oh,
not?
yes, he's written several books, and he, of course, is a musician with great merit. He's
yes.
excellent pianist and composer. And the funny thing is that when he was a Christian, he wrote Christian plays for children that put on at Christmas time. And he still gets, what do you call it when you get...
royalties?
Yes, from those. From those. They're still using them.
Yes.
Not knowing now, of course, they were written by a Christian then, but he's now an atheist, so...
Right, and I think when you come from that background, then you have really dug into religion. You can see the clear picture, so that when you leave, which is not easy because of society, you really have good reasons not to believe in all of this supernatural. And I think Dan certainly knows, since he was such a fundamentalist.
Yeah, I went around preaching all over,
for so
all
many
over the
years.
country and in Mexico and all that. And there was a trip from Christianity to atheism, and it was a toughie.
Well, who wrote the Atheist Cookbook?
I'm not really sure who wrote it, because it seemed to be compiled rather casually over time.
Okay.
And I sent them a few recipes, and I would forget little things about how long to bake it and what kind of pan to put it in. But Annie Laurie would clean up my messes, and she's so sweet. I think you could follow the ones that I contributed. But if I'd known they were going to put it in print, I tried harder. Gosh.
Well, you've written a lot of good things yourself, Catherine, and
recipes not
but not recipes
not one of
is
them.
not one of them. But you've written a lot of good things, and I think that a lot of people have been reading you for a long time, and they don't really know that we're around. But we are the Freethinkers Association of Central Texas, and we do have meetings. There's a phone number at the end of this program. You can just call Catherine, and she will, give you the information on when we meet and where and so forth. So thank you, Catherine, being Anne for today, for our little small
Wish I'd
effort
done better.
here. And thank you for listening, for watching rather.
I think as I please, and this gives me pleasure.
My conscience decrees, this right I must treasure.
My thoughts will not cater
To duke or dictator, no person can deny. Die Gedanken sind frei.